Welcome to the 400th Apollo Papyrus Podcast episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For the 400th episode of this podcast, my interview guest is a registered nurse and caregiver, and she is the author of the nonfiction book Enduring Together, Strength for the Weary Caregiver. Her name is Amy Chastain, and my interview with Amy will follow the note-taking sounds. Amy Chastain, welcome to the Apollo Papyrus Podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here this morning.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
My name is Amy Chastain. I am a new first-time author. I have a book that just came out for caregivers.
You were a registered nurse. What was or is, if you're still a nurse, your work as a registered nurse like?
So I came to nursing after some life changes. I went through a divorce and went back to school. So that was kind of a second go round for me. I worked briefly in the field in the emergency department before getting remarried and stepping back out of the paid workforce to take care of my family. But I'll say that even in such a short time, it really was quite eye-opening, and especially being somewhere like the emergency department, you're seeing people oftentimes, on their worst day. And my heart just really goes out to those people.
Your book about caregiving is titled Enduring Together, Strength for the Weary Caregiver. Without spoiling too much about Enduring Together, what is your book about?
So my book is really about meeting caregivers kind of in the middle of their real and raw pain. But I write from a Christian perspective. And so I also am, while acknowledging their pain, pointing them back to hope in Jesus and to the strength that we all have.
What motivated you to write Enduring Together?
I've been writing on and off for a long time, but I had just recently, my family just really walked through a season of difficult circumstances, and caregiving tied in with that. We, within the span of a few years, lost my father-in-law to Alzheimer's disease. We lost my mother-in-law after having suffered a major stroke. And a few years after that, we lost her as she began having pretty massive seizures. On top of which we had COVID, and my son became unexplainably kind of chronically ill and in and out of the hospital. And it was really out of my own pain and journey through caregiving and experiencing how lonely that can be, that kind of prompted me to write this book.
From start to finish, how long did it take you to write Enduring Together?
It was probably, honestly, a little less than 2 years. I was hoping to do it faster than that, but the manuscript, it took longer than I thought. And it was a long process. There were, before I really even started with the manuscript, I started with interviews. So I interviewed a lot of caregivers, and there are, while I've protected everyone's privacy, there are a lot of personal, true stories, actual hands-on caregiving. These things really happened to show the reader that they're not alone.
What are the easiest and hardest aspects of writing a nonfiction book for you?
Oh my goodness. Well, for me, honestly, because I have not done this before, and because my background is not, I didn't go to college and get a degree in literature or English. So I personally battled a lot of the imposter syndrome and feeling like, well, who are you to write this book, or why should anyone listen to you? And I'll say that, this was my own internal battle, but otherwise, I also struggled I don't even have an office in my house. I'm sitting writing at the kitchen table, and my family's very used to just, mom. And I had to kind of train them, hey, I'm working. I know it looks like I'm just sitting here, but I'm working, and there's a boundary that we need to respect. So just the physical, making the time and having that time be uninterrupted was a challenge for me.
Is Enduring Together independently, traditionally, or hybrid published? What was it like to get your book published?
So it is a hybrid. It is, for me, I think that was a really the right choice at this time in my life. In order, my understanding, to get traditionally published, you typically need a very large social media following or a large email list, good visibility, or an agent. And I had none of those things. But I also was really unfamiliar with the process. So I chose to kind of go the middle way. Um, and I got a lot of professional support, peer support, trainings, and I've really learned a whole lot through the process.
Do you plan on, or are you considering writing more books after Enduring Together? And if so, what are some ideas you have for books that you will or may write in the future?
Well, I haven't made any firm decisions, but there's definitely ideas floating around. To start with, I actually have several children's book manuscripts that have been, sitting in a filing cabinet for years that I might decide to revisit. Um, my ministry really at this point in life is trying to care for those who are caring for others. Um, so it's potential that down the line, I might like to address the topic of legacy and how that intertwines, right? The legacy as we get toward the back end of our life, what we're leaving for others, and we how we treat others and how we are caring for others is part of building the legacy that we will then in turn leave behind.
Does your background as a registered nurse help you when taking care of your own relatives?
Well, it does. It does, and it doesn't. That's a little bit of a double-edged sword. I have the medical knowledge oftentimes to, assess what a problem might be, or to say, oh, this happened and it might be X, Y, Z that's causing it. But taking care of family is very different than taking care of a patient in the hospital. There's just a different relationship. Um, Family members, for instance, I did some caretaking of my grandmother, and she was feisty and she did not want to have people help her. And so when there was an issue, she would tend to downplay it and to minimize it, and say, "No, I'm fine. No, I don't need to go to the emergency room." And occasionally I would have to, with her, pull the nurse card out of my pocket and say, "Look, we can do this. This is a real emergency, and we can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way." And usually once I would pull this, she would recognize, okay, I really should listen to you. But I'd say that even, whether you're a doctor or a nurse or any other professional in the medical field, you get with your own family, and there are times when they really appreciate that and want your knowledge. And there are times when it really doesn't matter, and they don't want to hear what you have to say, or they're not ready to hear, what you have to say. And so it's complicated.
And you have a valid point. Now, I have no formal medical or nurse training or anything like that whatsoever. I am not a physician, a nurse, or anything like that. But since I've been a teenager, I've had to be a caregiver of sorts of at least one of my parents. Because my father had a massive heart attack and survived it with significant brain damage when I was about 14 years old. And I had to care for him the rest of his life. And he was extremely stubborn headed.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother, I've been taking care of her since she had all kinds of health issues about 5.5 years ago. So I've had to take care of both of my parents since I was a teenager without having any formal medical or nursing training.
Sure. That had to be challenging, especially at such a young age.
My next question is, how has being a caregiver affected your faith journey as a Christian?
It has strengthened it. Although, had you asked me that question when I was really in the thick of it, when we couldn't manage to stay out of the hospital and grief. We also lost several family members during those years in quick succession. Um, I really felt like I was questioning, and that's part of what led me to write this book was, when you're in the thick of it and the feelings are so big and there's so much grief. Um, it's easy, I think, to question your faith. And then that was one more thing I felt guilty about, how, I wasn't being a good enough Christian. And I was struggling with the fact that I couldn't, especially with my son, I couldn't heal him. And as mom, I feel like I'm supposed to be able to fix it, and I couldn't. And so, I really struggled and had to wrestle with the concept of, why would a good God let this happen? And why is my loved one suffering and feeling unheard? But I can see now on the other side of it that was a journey that ultimately strengthened my faith. But it's hard to see it when you're in the middle of it sometimes. And I want people to know that if they're in that place right now, struggling, it doesn't make them a bad person. And if you're having a lot of big emotions and frustrations, especially about caregiving, anger even, that's normal. You're not alone. That's so normal. We often don't like to talk about it, but it's normal. And they really, even though they may feel alone right now, they're not.
When you talk about people being in a sandwich generation, you're referring to those who have to raise their own children while being the caregiver of elderly and or ill parents at the same time. What are some challenges faced by those people?
Oh my goodness, what challenges are those people not facing? We'll start just with the basic of logistics. They're getting older now, but I have 4 children. And so even just having 4 kids in the house, when let's say they each play a sport or have some sort of extracurricular activity, you're doing the back and forth to school plus those activities. And when you start adding caregiving on top of that, especially, caregiving is not always predictable. Somebody has a fall, somebody gets injured doing something, they need you unexpectedly. And when you are trying to manage a lot of moving pieces on the game board, caregiving just makes it just becomes extra challenging. And, I found myself feeling like I was in that position of having to choose. And sometimes you do have to choose who needs you more, or what really has to be handled right now. And sometimes someone is just going to be disappointed because you can't both take mom to the emergency room and take your child to soccer practice at the same time. You're only one person. So there's a lot of logistical challenges that go with that. Financial challenges are big for a lot of families. Life is expensive and care is expensive. And, when you're hit with both the costs of raising your children and, like I mentioned, soccer or whatever, you're paying for a lot of things. And I think the sandwich generation, not always, but sometimes they find themselves having to also contribute financially to their parents' care. And, that's just another strain on the family finances. And additionally, if you're in that age, you're probably still working. And then you have all these extra demands. And so, you've got these added financial responsibilities, but you might be needing to cut back hours at work, or perhaps not take that promotion that's going to require you to travel all the time. So there's just a lot of challenges that are facing people who are, both trying to take care of their parents and raise their own families at the same time. It's a lot.
How can caregivers learn to implement self-care, and how can others provide help and support for caregivers when they're overwhelmed, feeling a sense of guilt, or both?
Oh, goodness. Well, first step for caregivers is I would love for them to recognize that self-care, as the saying goes, self-care is not selfish. It is necessary. This is the whole concept of why they tell you on the airplane, should the oxygen masks drop down, put your own on first. Um, I was actually just at an event last night for adult children of aging parents, and there was an attorney that came to speak to us, and she shared that a lot of caregivers actually will die before the person they're taking care of. And some of that is just going to happen anyway, but a lot of it, I think, is tied into the fact that caregivers often put off going to the doctor or taking care of themselves, and their bodies can be under tremendous physical and emotional stress. So it's really, really important for them to take care of themselves and to start just by recognizing the need for it. And, a lot of people hear self-care and they're like, oh, I don't have time to go for a massage. Well, massages are great. But I mean, self-care also, it means you ate something nutritious today. Maybe you took a 10-minute walk around the neighborhood. Maybe you just let yourself sit down for 5 minutes and do nothing. And I would say, don't be afraid to ask for help. A lot of us, myself included, while I'm very willing to help other people and I'm quick to volunteer, how can I help you? I don't like to raise my hand and ask for help. So I would say for someone looking to help a caregiver, and I've heard this from a lot of people, offer something specific. I think we tend to say, let me know what I can do, or how can I help you? But an offer of, hey, I'm going to be at the carpool line anyway. Can I pick up your child from school and can they come play at my house for a few hours while you take care of this? Or I'm going to be at the grocery store. Why don't you give me your list and let me bring a few things to you? So offers of specific help oftentimes will be met with less resistance, or at least an acceptance of the help, versus oh, thanks, but I'm fine.
I have one final question for this interview. Why is it important that everyone, whether they've been a caregiver or not, understand the value of caregiving?
Oh my goodness. Well, caregiving, so there's value as in the moral sense of it, as in the human sense of it, right? And I think most of us probably recognize that at least somewhat. But there's also huge economic value. The unpaid caregiving that happens in this country is huge. I mean, we're talking, millions and millions and millions of dollars. And there isn't a system really. I mean, there are some basic guardrails, but there's so much care that is provided by families. And really, this is what keeps our communities strong. A lot of it is kind of done in the shadows, out of view, out of sight. But if we didn't have these family caregivers that were kind of being the glue, helping to keep parents in their home as long as possible, taking care of their special needs children, caring for a spouse with dementia, they are both providing physical care that we otherwise are not, hiring people for. And there's a shortage in that workforce to start with. But what they do is really strengthening their families and strengthening their communities. And I think that we are all better for having compassionate communities that take care of one another.
Amy, thank you for appearing on the Apollo Papyrus podcast. You were an amazing guest.
Thank you for having me.
It's been an amazing experience hosting 400 episodes of this podcast, and I look forward to producing more episodes of this podcast for the writers and readers out there. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding you all to find your writing and reading purpose. Bye for now. Copyright 2025, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.